YouTube Tick. In this video, I'm going to be covering more intrigues that I found connecting the CIA to the Pro Deo Catholic Intelligence Organization, which I covered in part one of this video, which was headed up by a Dominican Belgian priest named Father Felix Montillon. Interestingly, I didn't cover this in the video, but you can read this information in two books for reference. There is The Secret History of the Jesuits and Aber Manhattan's The Vatican and World Politics, or the Catholic Church Against the 20th Century. But Belgium, there was a fascist Catholic leader that took over Belgium in the late 30s named Leon de Grelle, and like he actively he wore like Nazi uniforms, and like de Grelle's followers, the Rexists, like openly uh, preached fascism and well greeted the Nazis like as friends when the Nazis came into Belgium. But I found in this video here, um, in the last video, I went through an archival report of a Pro Deo paper, and I found in that paper, I'll show you it here. This is the video I did here. Okay, here's the archive. Okay, I found that Henry Luce was a part of the Pro Deo organization. Okay, interesting also so this American Council for the International Promotion of a Democracy Under God was a subsidiary of Pro Deo. Okay. Interesting here, and here's the picture of the father. Here's the picture of the priest again. Um, Actually, here's a picture of Father Molian meeting with the academic senate. Yeah, here's Morlian. Okay. Um, right here. Here's the president of Pro Deo, the Dominican priest. Okay. I'm gonna read to you some declassified CIA documents that C.D. Jackson sent to Henry Luce. Okay, Henry Luce was a Skull and Bones Catholic. His wife Claire Booth Luce converted to Catholicism, became the U.S. ambassador to Italy. Um, Here's some pictures and more pictures of the Pro Deo classrooms. Okay, it's just Catholic indoctrination and a way to recruit intelligence agents to join the Catholics in action. Okay, here's some pictures of the Pro Deo classes. Okay, right there. There's some more students. Here's Father Mario Alarnia, head of the management secretariat at the Pro Deo office. Okay. Here's inside the Pro Deo's printing shop. Here, printing all the Catholic propaganda. Okay, but this is very significant. I'm going to show you this here. And I recommend you read all of these, like read this whole page here. It's worth checking it out. But look at here at the vice directors. I didn't mention this earlier. You see here is Henry R. Luce. Okay, Henry Luce was the head of the Time magazine conglomerate that also owned Life magazine and Fortune. But this is another big connection here is C.D. Jackson. C.D. Jackson was working for the OSS during World War II, which is headed up by Roman Catholic Papal Knight William Donovan. And William Donovan, I covered in part one. Actually, William Donovan and Father Felix Montillon had a close relationship, and this Pro Deo organization actually became like an operation of Donovan's, and that happened in 1941. You see here the two vice presidents on the Pro Deo here, Henry Luce and C.D. Jackson. And you see here Reverend Felix A. Morlian is here as the director. Okay, on this Pro Deo subsidiary. But here, see Henry Luce and C.D. Jackson. See that? And C.D. I'm going to show you a connection from C.D. Jackson. C.D. Jackson actually he was working. He was known as the CIA's inside man at Time magazine. He worked at Time magazine before becoming a psychological warfare expert. Lots of good practice being at Time for that job. But C.D. Jackson actually bought the Zapruder film after the Kennedy assassination to make sure that it was completely suppressed and altered. It's interesting there, but here's the CIA or this government document here. So this was declassified recently, actually in 2013, declassified under the authority of the Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel. Okay, and this was sent October 26, 1955, from C.D. Jackson to Mr. Luce. Okay, and here's the Wikipedias of them. Here's Charles Douglas Jackson. Jackson, you see here, he was a senior executive of Time Inc., an expert of psychological warfare. He served in the OSS during World War II, and later as a special assistant to the president. Okay, you see here, he was directly involved with the Bilderberg Group. You see here, between 1953 and 1954, C.D. Jackson was key in establishing the Bilderberg Group and ensuring American participation. He attended the Bilderberg Group meetings of 1954, 1957, 1958, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, and 1964. Jackson was also he was directly involved in creating a government-funded CIA operation, Radio Free Europe. Okay, and it's even on his Wikipedia. You see here, after Abraham Zapruder took the infamous film, Jackson purchased it. Okay, but I'm going to read you the quote. Jackson met with Jesuit Joseph Rettinger, who founded the Bilderberg Group in 1952 before Jackson attended all these Bilderberg meetings. Okay, but here's the message back and forth here from C.D. Jackson to Henry Luce, and this is notes on some key people. So one of the key people in this letter is Father Felix Morlian. Okay, the Catholic priest who is the head of this Pro Deo organization. Here's a picture of him again here. I'm gonna show you. Oh, yeah, here's a picture of Father Felix Borlian. Okay. Notice how in this document here that this letter Jackson's sending to Henry Luce, Skull Bones, Morlian. So this is the head of the Pro Deo organization that he's talking about. Okay, so this is Jackson talking here to Henry Luce, the head of Time Magazine. And watch some of my videos on Time Magazine if you haven't seen it. Okay. Um, you see here, so about Moylan, so this is C.D. Jackson talking here. He is still eager to have a word with you, that is Henry Luce, on 2 points. One, to report. Two, to ask if you are willing to lend your name as one of the incorporating fathers of the interdenominational lay group known as the American Council of the International University of Social Studies, quote, Pro Deo. As far as I can make out, there is no work involved, simply an annual pro forma ratification meeting. Marlon also wants me for this. I told him that you had a natural reluctance to join additional committees or councils, being up to your ears already, being up to your ears serving the Jesuits in so many different ways. But that I would nevertheless ask you. And as far as my name was concerned, I thought that one time inker would be enough, and therefore I would not go on if you accepted. While on this subject, I got the distinct impression that Alan Dulles' boys, he calls them Alan D's boys, Alan Dulles' boys were not handling this matter the right way. These new developments, what I told you to take the relationship with Alan out of the area of simple intelligence item collection and put this right squarely in the foreign policy or State Department area. Um, this does not mean that there will not be intelligence tidbits in the reports that Father Felix Moreland and De Angelis forward, but it does mean that the original reports can no longer be hoarded by third and fourth echelon CIA characters. So I wrote Alan a letter attached and please return. Alan reacted favorably and I think is going to give Felix Morlian through an appropriate cutout a sizable additional sum, at least for 1 year, which will then permit Morlian to collect matching funds from Valletta, which will then permit him really to get rolling and give everybody a breathing spell. Incidentally, Alan told me that he was the one who had engineered the meeting between his brother John Foster Dulles and the Pope Pius XII, which should do a lot towards clearing up some Vatican misconceptions regarding U.S. intentions, or are they misconceptions? You see here, there's a letter that Jackson sent to Henry Luce on the topic of Pro Deo. Okay, and he's advocating Alan Dulles to give this Catholic priest here, Father Felix Morion, more money. Okay, and Donovan took over this. Just watching this for the first time. William Donovan took over this Pro Deo movement early in the 40s. Okay, here's the second letter I wanted to show you here. This is another declassified file, declassified under the authority of the Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel, declassified again in 2013. This is from C.D. Jackson to the Skull and Bones Henry Luce, and this was sent April 15th, 1957. Okay. So this is a quote here from C.D. Jackson. Father Morlian is in town and naturally wants to see you. That is Skull and Bones Catholic Henry Luce. I have told him that you are extremely busy and having to make frequent trips. However, if you could see him for a few minutes later this week, he will be in Washington Wednesday and Thursday or next week. He would be happy and satisfied. Meanwhile, here's an updater. Last time we talked about this, Alan Dulles had removed his support because of negative reports from Rome as to the status of Pro Deo in the Vatican and Dominican eyes, and because Morlian's salesmanship had gotten a little ahead of his bookkeeping. I said that I would try to get at all the facts. I am satisfied as of this at the moment. A. The Dominican order is behind the project, that is Pro Deo. There is an absolute unequivocal letter signed by the Dominican general. And B, that the Vatican also approves, that is Pro Deo, although somewhat more cautiously because they do not wish to give the final formal public blessing before the organization is sufficiently well off financially so that it will not turn into a Vatican liability. Also because Pro Deo has plenty of enemies among those monsignori and cardinals who do not believe in such an interdimensional lay and democratic educational project under Vatican seal. That's funny how he how he calls his project democratic. Monsignori del Aquita and Montini, as well as Cardinal Ceruri, are squarely on Morleon's side. Interestingly, here, like Montini uh, was the Archbishop of Milan, became Pope Pius the Sixth, and he was working for the OSS during World War II. Actually, and that's quoted in this article that was done by Mother Jones magazine that I uh, linked in the previous video I did. We see here Giovanni Montini was no stranger to American television. He even got on the Henry Louis Time magazine. Giovanni Montini was no stranger to American intelligence. During World War II, he worked in the office of the Papal Secretariat and passed information to a grateful OSS, which was headed up by William Donovan, which was working with Pro Deo. Later, he had a falling out with Pope Pius XII and was exiled to Milan. That is because Montini wanted to merge Catholicism and Marxism, while Pope Pius XII wanted to continue the anti-communist Marxist crusade, a dialectic crusade. This news was well received by Vatican watchers within the CIA, who had pegged Montini as a quote a liberal. Nevertheless, he remained an important figure in the church with an extensive religious and political context. And you see here from that C.D. Jackson says Montini supported the Pro Deo movement. Every CIA station chief in Italy made a point of getting to know him, and CIA quote project money was donated to various orphanages and charities whose principal benefactor was the Archbishop of Milan. Yeah. Interesting here. This is a connection to Georgetown University here, and then I'm going to head back to the Pro Deo connections. When Montini became Pope, taking the name Paul VI, he continued to pursue an open door policy with the Soviet Union. Leaders from Eastern Europe were received on state visits. Soviet Foreign Minister Andriko Gromyko had 7 meetings with Pope Paul, and many Vatican officials traveled to Moscow for talks. Towards the end of his papacy, Pope Paul VI let it be known that he was not adverse to a center-left coalition of Italian Communist Party and the Christian Democrats. This infuriated hardline elements within the CIA, the hardline anti-democratic corporate side of the dialectic. In 1976, the Jesuit Georgetown University Center for Strategic and International Studies, a conservative think tank, sponsored a conference on the communist threat in Italy. Panelists include former CIA Director William Colby, who is directly working in Vietnam. I'm going to show you a connection to from William Donovan, the Papal Knight, to Ngo Diem in Vietnam when Donovan was the ambassador in Thailand. And I'm going to show you that picture of Cardinal Spellman with Ngo Diem. Okay, you see here, panelists include at this Georgetown Anti-Communist Conference, CIA Director, Knight of Malta, William Colby, who was station chief in Rome during the 50s, Claire Booth Luce, the husband of the wife of Henry Luce. Okay, and we've seen C.D. Jackson writing to Luce in these private documents. Claire Booth Luce was the U.S. ambassador to Rome at the same time, and Ray Klein, another ex-CIA official, and John Connolly. Okay. Um, So check out this whole article here. I linked this, and there's a wealth of information here. This was done by Mother Jones in 1983. It's called "The CIA and the Vatican's Intelligence Apparatus." But going back here to this document. Okay, so you see here Montini was on Moreland's side. This is back to C.D. Jackson. The above has been communicated to Alan Dulles, and Alan Dulles' nephew, guys, Avery Dulles, was a Jesuit priest. Okay, Alan Dulles' uncle, Robert Lansing, was the Secretary of State um, I believe under the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, and it was under Lansing that like American corporations like made massive strides. Not a coincidence that is related to Dulles. You see here, Alan Dulles with an urgent request that he consider. Alan Dulles will be seeing Father Moreland on Thursday morning. I am not too hopeful that he will change his mind, partly because his principal advisor in this area, on whom he relies completely, is a complete third-rater who has never been able to get the larger aspect through his head, and he continues to see it as a rather silly cloak and dagger operation. I have made this point, and they block out this section right here, interestingly. So they don't want to know who this, probably a connection to the Jesuits. That's why or the Catholic Church. That's why they blocked it out. But I have made this point politely but unmistakably to Allen on 2 occasions. He violently turned my letters over to the advisor in question. The American fundraising activities are still pretty much of a shambles for the reason that none of the quote volunteers involved are able to give this nearly full-time attention it must have in order to get the money. Nevertheless, all is not completely black since Dean Carner, a Catholic of Columbia, will probably replace George Schuster. Okay, so and I will think be able to give it a considerable more attention. Why? Because he's a Catholic. One hour a month would represent 100% improvement. Also, with Russell Bourne's help, we are finally putting together a simple brochure. All of Father Felix Morlian's, head of Pro Deo's, previous efforts being worse than useless. Morlian has also been talking to John Price Jones. When I explained to him that these fundraising organizations did not actually solicit money themselves, but acted as a professional secretariat for the appropriate individuals, Morlian assured me that this was different and what they had and that they had an individual who had quote done the work for Fordham end quote Fordham Jesuit University. I will find more about this. I will find out more about this. Okay, but let's look at this. So, um, Morleon assured C.D. Jackson that the work to solicit money uh, was was done by an individual who quote had done the work for Fordham end quote. Interesting. I'm gonna see if this guy. I haven't heard of this John Price Jones, but Father Felix Morleon was meeting with him as well. If there's a Wikipedia here, looks like he was an author. John Price Jones, a fundraiser who collected $1 billion. A former reporter persuaded Harvard alumni to give record 15 million. Interesting. Sure, I wonder if a lot of this charity money was being funneled into the Pro Deo CIA intelligence network. Interesting. Um, yeah, so I'll link this in the description after the video is done. Um, I wanted to show you that. So those are the two declassified letters I found. And these letters are being written to by C.D. Jackson and Henry Luce. And this was an interesting article I found here. It was titled "How the CIA's Doctrinal Warfare Program Changed the Catholic Church," done by Veterans Today, March 2016. And it was done. This is like a kind of a question and answer from this author who wrote a book titled John Courtney Murray, The Lifetimes of the American Proposition, How the CIA's Doctrinal Warfare Program Changed the Catholic Church. So this guy wrote a biography. I'm going to try to actually get this biography because John Courtney Murray was a Jesuit who was like the controller or player of the Vatican II Council. Interesting here, you see here that Henry Luce, and you see Henry Luce was directly involved in Pro Deo. He was writing back and forth to Colonel C.D. Jackson. Um, that's what I want to show you here. And the Jesuit priest Murray was also close to Felix Morian. Um, let me see here. Okay, so this is what I want to show you here. So this is from his book. So this interviewer is asking this author here, Alexis, you write that quote. In exchange for his ideas, the Rockefellers gave the Jesuit John Courtney Murray, I'm adding the Jesuit, Jesuit John Courtney Murray money access to the funding offered by the elite foundations, that's the Rockefellers. Murray's contact with the Rockefellers allowed Georgetown University to land funding for a program called, quote, an experimental program. Oh, the funding was called an experimental program in executive education to be undertaken cooperatively by Georgetown University and the William A. Jump Memorial Foundation, end quote, which was meant to, quote, enlarge the abilities of men and women and to rise in their, quote, career executive positions in the federal government and there exercise an important influence on the growth of democratic institutions. Sounds pretty Jesuitical. You see your Jesuit Murray then wrote a letter to Dean Rusk at the time, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, when he asked them for money. Helping the Rockefellers made one popular with Catholics in the U.S. of the money that flowed into the Catholic institutions from the Rockefellers. Okay. And then here's a question here. Oh, here, tell us who John Courtney Murray really was and unpack for us the moral and intellectual consequences of his attachment to the Rockefellers, who were furiously working to depopulate some specific groups in America. And you can hear from the author. As previously mentioned, Murray was a Catholic priest of the Jesuit order, and he was born and raised in New York City. Importance is that he provided the appearance of a Catholic theological justification for the American ideology, which was termed the American proposition. And you see here, Henry Luce was like directly on the board of Pro Deo, working with it. Okay, and C.D. Jackson was writing. I read to you the letters earlier. He was writing to Henry Luce about Pro Deo. But Henry Luce, a media mogul who founded Time Inc., who which publishes the magazine of Time, Fortune, Life, and Sports Illustrated. I didn't know Luce owned Sports Illustrated. Interesting. Worked closely with the U.S. government and the Rockefellers in terms of advancing the American proposition. Luce was a skull and bones, by the way. Luce was a friend, patron, and in general a fellow traveler with Jesuit Murray. Together, Luce and Murray, who had also worked for the Rockefellers, led an effort to convince the Catholic leadership that America was the ideal form of social organization. However, Murray was not the only Catholic priest used to advance liberalism. It is just that he was the best known. Felix Morlian, like I mentioned, I showed you pictures of him earlier. I covered in part one. Was the founder of, or the head of the Pro Deo. Felix Morlian was a Dominican priest who founded the Pro Deo University and who was actively promoting the American ideology before Murray got involved. That's Jesuit Murray. Morlian's efforts were funded by American intelligence, like we've seen in video one, part one, William Donovan, and supported by Henry Luce and his people. Pro Deo University was headquartered in Rome and it taught its students that America was the ideal society while preparing these students for leadership roles in business and society in their home countries, many of which were Catholic countries such as those in Latin America. Um, I just want to show you that here. So check out this whole article here. But you see here, this Jesuit Father Courtney Murray was directly involved in Pro Deo, and he was close with Henry Luce and developing a relationship between the Jesuits, the Catholic Church, and the Rockefellers. But this is the book here that author David Wenberf. The book was titled John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. How the CIA's doctrinal warfare changed the Catholic Church. I'm definitely going to get that book. It sounds like an interesting read. You see here, there's more connections from the Jesuits and the CIA to Pro Deo Father Felix Morlian. And here is an academic journal that I found right here. Uh, right, okay, where was it here? Yeah, so this journal article here um, was called A Philosophy of Democracy Under God, Jackson, C.D. That's at C.D. Jackson, Henry Luce, and the Pro Deo movement, done by Columbia University. This author here is French, Valier Orbogue, but you can translate this article into English on this website. I linked it in the description. Okay. You see here, like developed in in Europe before World War II by Catholic personalities in the United States during war movement. Pro Deo received the American side the support of Henry Luce, the influential head of Time Life Inc., and C.D. Jackson, Luce's correspondent for this issue of To the Europeans, including when he was appointed to serve as president of the Cold War advisor to President Eisenhower, and Luce's wife as U.S. ambassador to Rome. Okay. At the intersection of intelligence, cultural diplomacy, media, and foreign policy, the Pro Deo movement is in line with the anti-communist initiative supported by the U.S. administration in Europe. Through Henry Luce and C.D. Jackson, the analysis of the American support of Pro Deo allows us to look at the religious element that shapes the worldview of a certain American elite, the role of religion in the Cold War, and religious networks as a tool of influence reinforcing the foreign policy of the United States. Okay, so you see here, I'm not going to read the whole article because I don't want it to go too long. I'm just going to read some little excerpts here. The path of the Belgian Dominican father Felix Morland makes it easy to understand the interests of Luce and Jackson. Founded in 1932 in Brussels, its first quote Pro Deo Information Publication Center, the CIP, spawns a movement against totalitarian ideologies in Western Europe through a Catholic-led public opinions campaign. This is just like the CIA's Radio Free Europe creation, but especially Catholic theme. After the German invasion, Morleon, sought by the Gestapo, recreated a Pro Deo International Center in Lisbon, then in New York in 1941 around an American Catholic International Press, which provides press service and a bi-monthly newsletter and courses on the principles of democracy. Here, like I mentioned in part one, Father Morley, in addition, is linked to the head of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, William Donovan. It is he who evacuates from Lisbon to New York, finances during the war, and helps him to regain Rome in 1943. Okay. Morleon refers to his, quote, psychological warfare activities in the United States in 1941 to 1944 with anti-totalitarian leaders. Okay. So you see here, let me see here. And you see here, Pro Deo was involved with the request of Pope Pius XII to create a training structure called the School of Mass Communication Media, which is the nucleus of anti-communist democratic coordination instrument centered in Rome that the Pope then envisions. Devoted to the struggle against the communist influence in Italy, she trained for several years executives who in turn instructed the actors of, quote, civic communities created by Knight of Malta Luigi Getta. There's information on Luigi Getta. This article right here. Getta was connected to the whole CIA Pro Deo merging. According to Mother Jones, according to previously classified State Department memoranda, James J. Angleton, Knight of Malta, which I covered a bit in part one, recommended that the CIA fund Catholic Action, an Italian organization headed by Luigi Getta, a prominent right-wing ideologue who also been honored by the Knights. Getta was a key operative in an effort undertaken by the CIA and the Vatican to, quote, barricade the Reds in the 1948 Italian elections. Yeah. And you can read more about Catholic Action in that article there. Okay. You see Luigi Getta is connected to this. Okay. I'm just going to show you that pamphlet. Yeah. Give me a second. Yeah, so if I go through this whole article here, I just want to find this. In this article is mentioned this little pamphlet, like this. See here, this is called the American Council for the International Promotion of a Democracy. This is mentioned in this article, but I just can't find it right now. Here, I'm just going to read a little bit more here. So this is a section here, Pro Deo University in the early 1960s. So this is well after the CIA was actually created. Here, after a certain hesitation in 1960 due to Father Morleon's temporary difficulties with the Vatican, the Italian-American partnership of Pro Deo is strengthening. This time around Latin America, where the Jesuits also, that's their territory, with which Father Morleon had contacts since the 1930s. That's in Central America. Father Morleon had contacts in Central America since the 1930s. Okay, his contacts are William Donovan's contacts in Central America, just like Cardinal Spellman's contacts in Central America. They're all part of the secret government. Okay. After the war, the university Pro Deo opened centers in Lima in 1952, Rio de Janeiro in 1953, Bogota in 1953, and the Dominican Republic in 1956, mainly with funds from local employers, organizations, and then agreements with governments. It is strongly supported by public and private donations from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Dominican Republic, and the Latin America Institute opened in Rome in 1957 with a donation of $635,000 from the Brazilian government. Okay. Okay. So yeah, check out this article here. This is really well done, and it goes into especially like Henry Luce's and C.D. Jackson's connections with Pro Deo. That's the name of the article, done by Columbia University. And you can translate this into French. Okay. Um, yeah, there's just a couple more connections I wanted to show you here. Um, so C.D. Jackson, who we've seen was intimately involved with Pro Deo, he was on the board of that American University subsidiary, American Pro Deo subsidiary that I showed you. He was on the board with Henry Luce as vice presidents. We're going to see here that C.D. Jackson met with Joseph Rettinger. I'm just going to show you the quote for that. It's in the book The Chairman by Kai Bird. It's taking a while to load. Okay, right here. So this is in 1952, and we see here Pro Deo was active like during this time, the 50s and the 60s. They're opening up tons of schools and universities all over the world and making connections in South America. You see here John J. McCloy, and actually I covered in the first video. John J. McCloy was a big key in actually preserving some of like he preserved like the X2 division of the OSS and some other divisions. Like he preserved key units of the OSS that were key. And once the National Security Act in 1947 was drafted, that the OSS still had its infrastructure in place, and then it came to be the CIA. You see here Jesuit Joseph Rettinger, who created he actually created the American Committee for United Europe, which was completely CIA funded. You can read like even like the Guardian newspaper has like done articles on that. How that the committee, the U.S. Committee for United Europe was really controlled. We see here Jesuit Rettinger went to America. He also saw Avril Harriman. I covered in a couple of videos ago. Avril Harriman met with Yuri Ponderev. Yuri Andropov, who was the head of the KGB. He had a private meeting in 1983, and Avril Harriman set up the first commercial bank in Soviet Russia, the Ruscom Bank. Harriman, Skull and Bones, just like Luce, who was connected to Pro Deo, and Harriman became the U.S. ambassador to Soviet Russia in 1944. See the Rockefellers. David Rockefeller met Rettinger. He saw Rockefeller, Jesuit Courtney Murray, and Henry Luce were connected to the Rockefellers. And the head of the CIA, Bedell Smith, met with Rettinger. After Rettinger explained his proposal, Smith said, quote, "Why the hell didn't you come to see me in the first place?" He quickly referred Rettinger to C.D. Jackson, who I've mentioned quite a bit in this video, Jesuit Rettinger, who was about to become Eisenhower's special assistant for psychological warfare. It took a while for Jackson to organize the American wing of the group, that is the Bilderberg Group. But finally, in May 1954, the first conference was held in the Hotel de Bilderberg, a secluded hotel in Holland, near the German border. Knight of Malta, Nazi, Prince Bernhard, I added that, but that's a fact. Prince Bernhard was a Nazi and a Knight of Malta. And Rettinger drew up the lists of invitees from European countries, while Jackson controlled the American list. As Rettinger later explained, invitations were, quote, "only sent to important and general respected people who, through their special knowledge or experience, their special contacts, and their influence in national and international circles, can help further the aim set by Bilderberg." And I believe Rettinger said this in his memoirs that were published by Sussex University in 1972, and I actually bought that book, and I plan on reading it out on my channel because it'll clear up a lot of confusion, I think. We see here all these big time though, like David Rockefeller, Dean Rusk, Joseph Johnson turned up in Bilderberg to meet influential Europeans, like the head of the premier of Italy, Alcide de Gasperi, Roman Catholic, was in the Bilderberg as well. Okay, so there's the source for that. Um, Actually, I'm gonna show you. Speaking, I think there's a picture online of Henry Luce. I'm gonna show you the picture of Spellman with DM from my book here, but yeah, this is a photo here. Henry Luce, I've was directly involved in Pro Deo. Okay, I showed you that via the declassified documents. But in this picture here, there's Henry Luce on the right. Okay, Nago DM in the center, and Francis Cardinal Spellman on the left. Okay, and actually, I have. Give me a second. I'm gonna show you the page from the picture from the American Pope because this is. I'm gonna show you this before I go because Donovan, Donovan's Pro Deo was essentially run by Donovan as well as Morlian. Okay, and Donovan, when Donovan was the U.S. ambassador in Thailand, he was known as like the official like second ambassador to Vietnam while he was in Thailand, and Donovan was working to get the Catholic dictator Ngo Diem in power in the early 50s. Okay, and that's when Donovan was stationed in Thailand in the early 50s. But here's the photo. So you see on the screen though, that's Henry. Like, this is a very significant photo. That's Henry Luce, William Donovan, and or not William Donovan, Henry Luce, Francis Spellman, and Ngo Diem. And here's Ngo Diem meeting with Eisenhower, right here, and John Foster Dulles. Looks like. And I read from the declassified memo earlier that Alan Dulles arranged a meeting with Pope Pius XII for his brother John Foster Dulles, and Alan Dulles' nephew is the Jesuit priest Avery Dulles. Okay. But actually, I'm going to show you the good picture in here because Cardinal Spellman was officially known as the American Vicar of the Armed Forces. As you can see a picture here of Spellman, like with all his military gear on, right here. And like Spellman, like I think there's pictures on the internet. Like he famously like would fly to like Vietnam in like massive American aircraft carriers, and he called the soldiers in the Vietnam War the soldiers of Christ. There's that photo there. But here's Spellman with Nego Diem right here. There's Nego Diem, but kind of like bowing down to Cardinal Spellman. Right here, you see it. Okay. There's Spellman. There's Nego Diem. Yeah, and actually, you can read in Aver Manhattan's book, The Vietnam, Why'd You Go to War? Nego Diem's brother, he had two of the three Diem brothers, like literally ruled Vietnam with an iron fist. He had Diem, the devout Catholic, was the president. One of his brothers was the Archbishop in Hanoi, and his other brother was the head of the secret police of the totalitarian regime. Yeah, talk about some power. So here's Cardinal Spellman here meeting with the Catholic dictator of Nicaragua named General Antasio Somoza. Here's this photo here. Here's Antonio Somoza right here, Nicaraguan dictator, and here's Cardinal Spellman meeting him, smiling. Okay. Um, Here's a funny picture here of Cardinal Spellman. It says like "Praise the Lord" and ammunition. I don't know if you can see it right there. I'll zoom in. Cardinal Spellman was good friends with William Donovan. And, interestingly, the whole Knights of Malta aristocracy is web like, connected. But like, Francis Spellman like courted John J. Raskob around the Vatican in 1925, and Raskob became one of William Donovan's clients when, or like Raskob and Donovan were involved in espionage when DuPont was breaking all these antitrust laws, and they had to have Roman Catholic intelligence traders like Donovan as antitrust lawyers to make sure the whole scam would go on. But I just want to show you one more connection here with Nego Diem's wife, and then I'm going to show you Donovan's connection to Nego Diem. And actually, Jesuit educated, not or Knight of Malta Catholic William Colby, who I mentioned earlier in this video, who was at a Georgetown anti-communist conference in the 70s. Colby was also involved with putting Diem in power, as Colby was the CIA stationed, or he was stationed on a CIA mission in Vietnam during the war. All right, give me a second here. I guess it's a document here. Yeah, I really recommend you read this book here. Avro wrote this or Manhattan wrote this in like 1986. Nego Diem's wife came to Fordham University, and this dictator's wife got like a standing ovation at Fordham. So you see here, Madame Nu was the wife of Nego Diem. So actually, I'll show you so here's a picture of it. Okay, here's a picture of Nego Diem, the dictator's wife. Okay, here, Madame Nu, wife of the head of the secret police, disdain the suicides by fire. Buddhists were committing suicide by fire to protest the tyranny, as quote imported gasoline to quote barbecue themselves. Madame Nu fiercely promoted the Catholicization of South Vietnam even after it became evident that the backing of the U.S. was in jeopardy. She then made a promotional tour of the U.S. to quote to explain the true situation to the Americans. Her first call was upon Cardinal Spellman, the principal sponsor of the Diem regime. The vast Catholic machinery in the U.S. went into action to make her campaign a success. Catholic papers joined in influential individuals and organizations who came to the sponsor to support and promote Madame Nu's advocacy of a Diem regime. After the assassination of President Diem and her husband, Ngo Dinh Nu, then retired to Rome in 1964. This isn't the wife of Diem. This was the wife of the secret police who was Diem's brother. Yeah, I apologize for the mishap there. But Diem's brother was the wife of the secret police. Okay. But essentially, Albert Manhattan says here that this wife of the head of the secret police, came to a secular university in the U.S. and was like booed. And then, but you see here, so during a visit to Columbia University, for instance, Madame New was greeted by students with catcalls and boos. At Jesuit Fordham University, however, she had a quote enthusiastic reception from 5,000 Catholic students at the Jesuit school. The striking difference in her reception by two diverse sections of the American youth was significant, particularly in the view that the fact that the 5,000 students with their Jesuit teachers claimed to believe in religious liberty. The Jesuit reception was even more startling because the Vatican, since the ascension of Pope John Paul XXIII, far from encouraging the DMs in their religious fervor, has, as we already mentioned, cold-shouldered them. But that's the open-close policy, because John Paul II openly is uh, promoting ecumenism, but it's just a Trojan horse because the spirit of Catholicism never changes. The fires of the Inquisition will always be there. Okay. But yeah, I recommend you read this book here, Aber Manhattan. Vietnam, why'd you go to war? Here was the connection with Bill Donovan to Nego Diem. Uh, I thought I had the page up for a second. You see here, Donovan met the author of the James Bond novels, interestingly. Yeah, so here, this was when Donovan was the ambassador to Taiwan. Yeah. Um, this year, Donovan, like Eisenhower, did not want to send American forces after the fall of Dien Bien Phu. Said he pushed for propaganda and covert operations to keep Ho Chi Minh from taking over. And Dien Bien Phu was a puppet of the French imperialists who were controlling Vietnam up to this time. He lobbied Phao to commit the secret police to the Saigon government, that's Donovan, to fight the Viet Minh and press the CIA station chief in Bangkok to set up supply flights into Vietnam. William Donovan also looked for a true nationalist hero to unify the nation of Vietnam. He believed he had found that man in Ngo Diem, who was appointed Prime Minister of South Vietnam after the Dien Bien Phu defeat by Bo Dai. Bo Dai was actually another French puppet. Bo Dai, the French puppet emperor for the French, and an anti-Viet Minh politician who had lived in exile since 1950. Diem, who had become a favorite with the conservative Republicans in Washington, he was also a Catholic and became highly recommended to Donovan by clerics. Okay. Donovan met with Diem frequently. I repeat, Donovan met with Diem frequently, and Diem made it to Time magazine, which Henry Luce, which I mentioned a lot in this video, owns or controlled, created. Donovan met with Diem frequently in Washington and Saigon to become convinced he was the Catholic alternative to Ho Chi Minh and worth supporting. He plugged Diem with lawmakers visiting Bangkok. In his letters to Eisenhower, South Vietnam's new leader is, quote, an intense nationalist and an incorruptible man, end quote. That's what William Donovan said of Ngo Diem. And you see here, the author he doesn't go into the Diem dictatorship. You can read about great information on that in Aber Manhattan's book, Vietnam, Why'd We Go? Donovan proved a poor judge of character in this case. Diem, who became the president of Vietnam in 1955, turned out to be a corrupt and despotic dictator. As I mentioned, he literally practiced Catholic despotism. Was assassinated by the Jesuits. Actually, there's one more actually piece of information I want to show you in this video that ties in C.D. Jackson directly to the JFK death. Okay, and I think there are many reasons for JFK dying, but him taking out the puppet Jesuit Vatican administration of Ngo Diem was definitely one of those reasons. This is from a quote here from the book Charles Douglas Jackson, Cold War Propagandist for Democracy and Globalism, published by the University Press of America, author John Allen Stern. Okay, we see here, perhaps no Cold War history would be complete if it did not in some way intersect with the enduring mystery that continues to surround the assassination of Eisenhower's successor, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. C.D. Jackson's saga does not disappoint in that respect. On the evening of the day JFK was murdered on November 22nd, 1963, Richard B. Stoley of Life magazine contacted businessman Abraham Zapruder, an amateur photographer, who with his newly purchased motion picture camera filmed the entire shooting sequence that took the president's life. The film, among many to be shot that day, stands as the preeminent record of the event and therefore invaluable to researchers and investigators alike who seek to uncover the source, timing, and a number of gunshots. Fruiter agreed to meet Stoli the following morning, Saturday, November 23rd at 9 a.m. They met inside at 8 a.m. in the company of Secret Service agents. Stolly then purchased. Actually, what was this? Richard B. Stolly. Actually, I'm gonna see if this guy is a Catholic really quick. That would just kind of be like the turkey for the connection here. Here's Richard Stolly here. He served as the founding managing editor of People magazine and editor across all of Skull and Bones' Time Inc. Uh, publications. Doesn't say where he's educated here. You see here he met with Abraham Zapruder to buy the Zapruder film. So yeah, this guy was working for Time magazine here, Richard Stoley. Okay. You see here Stoley contacts businessman Adrian Zapruder, an amateur photographer who with his newly purchased uh, actually, I already read that here. Zapruder agreed to meet Stoley the following morning, Saturday, November 23rd at 9 a.m. They instead met at 8 in the company of Secret Service agents. Stoley then purchased the rights to the film, which Zapruder claimed was the original copy. The purchase price was $50,000. When the next copy of the original film was shown to Time Life Inc. executive C.D. Jackson proposed that all rights to it be purchased from Zapruder and, quote, withheld from public viewing, end quote. On November 29th, November 1963, Life, that's owned by Skull and Bones Loose, Pro Deo uh, member, okay. Life published a special issue on the assassination, highlighting the selected frames from what they now called, the, quote, their Zapruder film, end quote. That's Henry Luce saying that his magnet, uh, his Loose empire, which controls Time, Life, and Sports Illustrated, and Fortune, amongst many others. The deleted frames made it impossible to determine accurately from which direction the shot or shots that hit the president's head came. And 1 year later, October 1964, after the publication of the Warren Commission report that actually had Alan Dulles leading the report, I read you Alan Dulles was directly involved in Pro Deo. Alan Dulles got Father Felix Montillion additional millions of dollars. Okay. They don't disclose that millions of dollars in the report, but it was millions of dollars that that was being funneled into this organization. Okay, Alan Dulles was actually so you got to think about it, like he was fired by JFK earlier in the 60s, and then he became the chief investigator of the death. Okay, and Alan Dulles with his nephew Jesuit priest Avery Dulles was fully grown up by this time. Like that appointment in itself should tell you that the whole JFK assassination was a cover up. Okay. Former University of California Berkeley professor and longtime investigative journalist Pete Dale Scott notes in his book on the assassination, Deep Politics, that C.D. Jackson may have had Life magazine purchase the Zapruder film and the rights to Marina Oswald's story at the behest of his close friend and former colleague Alan Dulles, an important member of the Warren Commission and former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Scott noted Jackson's expertise at, quote, influencing public opinion, end quote, in his years inside government where his service was quote, psychological warfare. Jackson also arranged, quote, at the urging of Dulles to have Marina's story ghostwritten for Life magazine by Isaac Don Levine, a veteran CIA publicist, end quote. Levine had worked with CDJ and Alan Dulles prior to this, and in 1953 he had collaborated with them to coordinate a U.S. psychological warfare response to the death of Stalin. I'm gonna see if I haven't heard of this guy. He's definitely a big player here to the invisible government. Okay. Isaac Don Levine, anti-communist writer. Okay, that was working with the CIA. Okay. Born into a Zionist family. Interesting there. Okay. And actually, he provided testimony to the Jesuit-controlled House of Un-American Activities Committee in the case against Alger Hiss. Interestingly. Watch my video on that Jesuit Un-American Activities Committee, but here he had Isaac Don Levine testify there. Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame revealed in the disturbing October 1917 Rolling Stone magazine confessory article. You can find that article on the internet. That sometimes incestuous relationships that exist between American journalists and governmental agencies. Bernstein went on to claim that Jackson was the CIA's, quote, inside man at Life. And this, like I showed you, Jackson was directly involved with the CIA's project Pro Deo. Okay, but Carl Bernstein journalists claim that C.D. Jackson also was uh, influential in the creating of the Bilderberg Group, meeting with Jesuit Joseph Rettinger. Jackson was the CIA's inside man at Life in that he had personally arranged for CIA employees to travel with Time Life credentials as cover. Moreover, Bernstein maintained that some of Jackson's, quote, cover arrangements for Central Intelligence, quote, were made with the knowledge of Skull and Bones Henry Luce's Catholic wife, Claire Booth Luce, who was the U.S. ambassador to Italy. What may have been compelled Time Life CEO Henry Luce, along with his wife Claire Booth, to his Factonium CDJ into collaborating in a possible CIA-inspired conspiracy cover story is the fact that Life magazine was allowing its reporters to accompany CIA-led hit teams to attack Castro's Cuba. The reason they're doing that is because the CIA-led hit teams weren't actually going in to kill Castro because Castro was Jesuit educated at 3 schools, and Castro has Italian blood in him, and he was a Roman Catholic and close with John Paul II. Okay, we see here CIA led hit teams to attack Castro, Cuba, and had even financed some of the raids at the direction of Luce and his rabidly anti-communist spouse, Claire Booth Luce. Then becomes plausible that C.D. Jackson indeed may have been acting in what he thought was Time Life's best interest in coordinating what Scott described as a, quote, PR manipulation of the dialectical cover-up of a conspiracy to kill the president, end quote. In his public missings about the assassination, Jackson, in the short time he had to live after the crime, clung to the theory that was then being postulated to the world by the Warren Commission: a lone assassin with no lone accomplices. Actually, I played a video of it. Uh, Harvey Oswald said that he was a patsy in the Dallas Police Department when he was being detained, and interestingly, a Jesuit novice named David Ferry or Eric John Phelps. The reason I exposed Eric John Phelps because he said that David Ferry was a Jesuit novice just like me, but David Ferry was a Jesuit educated Roman Catholic pilot uh, during World War II. But it was he was actually accused of being like of having known Lee Harvey Oswald and soliciting Lee Harvey Oswald. So and I linked the information in the comment on that little video clip I did of Oswald. But Jesuit coadjutor David Ferry, I think, knew Oswald. So Oswald, I think, was just kind of like you said, he was a patsy. I think he was kind of a social outcast, and they just used him as a fall guy. Let me see here. But that is Jackson's involvement in a conspiracy cover-up, though probably benign in intent and unwitting as to its purpose, remains evident in the great dispatch Jackson employed in having his relative-in-law, Life journalist Richard Billings, coordinate a, quote, a Life team in Dallas that swiftly bought up the Zapruder film and the rights to Marina's story, end quote. Except for some skullduggery by researchers who purloined the film note from the Time Life vault in 1973 and showed it on Gerardo Rivera's Goodnight America national television program, Zapruder's visual record of the crime may well have been hidden from the American public's view for many more years. Time Life Inc. has played a key role in in the years since the JFK assassination in attempting to shape the public's perception of the crime. Because Henry Luce was a CIA agent working for Time Life. Okay, Henry Luce. You saw, like I read earlier, he was very intimate with Jesuit Courtney Murray S.J. Okay, Henry Luce's wife, Claire Booth, a famous convert to Catholicism that did uh, tons of philanthropy for the Catholic Church, like tons. Okay, guys. And Henry Luce was in the Skull and Bones, and I've mentioned on my previous videos that the Skull and Bones are an organization that breaks through both sides of the dialectic of fascism and communism. The Skull and Bones are a very powerful organization, and that's why Henry Luce had so much influence because he was in the Skull and Bones. Your Time published the former president and the Warren Commission member Gerald Ford's account of the investigation, which of course posited the lone gunman theory in August 1964. And this is interesting here. Curiously, 30 years later, Time Life Inc. helped finance Oliver Stone's film JFK. Kevin Costner is the main actor, in which the controversial director Oliver Stone purports to shatter the myths that were in the foundation of the government's version of the crime. Although, if you watch that movie, that's just gatekeeping if you actually know the extent to the real cover up. And Jackson's in law, Richard Billings, co authored with G. Robert Bakley, chief counsel of the Report of House Select Committee's 1976 1978 investigation of the crime, a report that also called into question the Warren Commission's finding of no conspiracy. At this juncture, the evidence suggests only that the Time Life team, headed by its master propagandist C.D. Jackson, may have manipulated it into covering up out of self. And you guys, I read to you earlier, C.D. Jackson was involved in Pro Deo. And with the powerful means at his disposal, any hint of conspiracy that would have been implicated, however tangentially some of its own, those responsible in the wake of the assassination for putting Jackson and his colleagues, most importantly Henry and Claire Booth Luce. I showed you a picture of Henry Luce with a picture of Francis Spellman and Nego Diem earlier, into an untenable position where the cooperation in a quote cover up was their sole resource for probably the culprits who pulled off the quote crime of the century. Yeah. So I just wanted to show you that information there, and I'm going to show you some pictures of Charles Douglas Jackson. I think there are pictures of him out there because he's come up quite a bit in this video. You see here on this Pro Deo archive clip here, you can see Jackson was a vice president. Okay, you see right here, C.D. Jackson, Henry Luce. Okay, here's a picture of him right here. Okay, worked for the OSS during World War II. Okay, there's a photo of him there. Not many photos of this guy. There he is there, Charles Douglas Jackson with Time Life behind him. Okay. And we've seen Claire Booth Luce was a big player to the CIA. And if you read all the links I shared in the description, you see that she was very connected to Pro Deo, Father Morlean, the Jesuits, all sorts of things. Here, Claire Booth Luce, U.S. ambassador. Okay, she was the wife of Henry Luce. Okay, anti-communism, witch hunt, playing that dialectic. She converted to Catholicism in 1946. She campaigns for every Republican presidential candidate from Wendell Willkie to Ronald Reagan. Yeah, she was a U.S. ambassador to Italy, Brazil, two Catholic countries. She was also a member of the House of Representatives from Connecticut. Um, actually, you know, I'm going to just I don't. I'm gonna actually, no, I'm gonna do a future video on that. I'm gonna do a future video with Trump's sister's Jesuit connections. But you can Palm Beach News. Yeah, there's some Palm Beach news stories covered that Trump's sister Marianne Trump donated 4.5 million to Fairfield University, and she was talking about that her devout love for Ignatian spirituality. Claire Booth Luce was given a Dame of Malta. She founded the construction of a Catholic church. Yeah, so she was all over the place. Okay. Yeah, it's all these connect. Read these. Go over these declassified files here with Pro Deo, and should definitely check out this article here, "The CIA and the Vatican's Intelligence Apparatus" by Martin Lee Mother Jones, and this one in particular, "A Philosophy of Democracy Under God: Jackson, C.D. Jackson, Henry Luce, in the Pro Deo Movement." Okay, and this book here, I'm gonna try to get my hands on this. John Courtney Murray, Time Life Inc. and the American Proposition: How the CIA's doctrinal warfare program changed the Catholic Church. You see, Jesuit John Courtney Murray was very intimate with Father Morlean, Henry Luce, and the Rockefellers, among many other elites in the U.S. Yeah. But that's all for this one, YouTube. Peace and love, and Nam Nas.